Hello, everyone, once again, and once again, welcome to Infinite Discoveries, where we explore world affairs, philosophy, history, the social and behavioral sciences, spirituality, arts, and culture with academics, scholars, activists, and visionaries. As always, we are your three happy hosts, respectively, Rich Brago, Miguel Rodriguez, and Aurobindo Mahapatra. If you want to put further faces to the names, feel free to visit our website, infinitediscoveries.org.
Welcome to Infinite Discoveries. Today we have Dr. Carl Colavito. Dr. Carl Colavito is a Socratic kind of guy, earned master's in political science and a PhD in foundations of education at the University of Florida. He had run several small businesses and enterprises before becoming a college professor. For the past 2 decades, he has taught political science, education, humanities, and philosophy. His research and writings focus on the education necessary to achieve self-mastery, both for a deeply fulfilling, beautiful, wonderful life, and to effectively and justly govern society where we can experience that joyful and healthy life. He is the author of Rational Discourse for Citizenship and Progress, Prepare to Talk Politics. So I have a copy of that book with me now. Currently, he's a professor of political science at the Florida State College at Jacksonville. So welcome, Dr. Colavito, and I think you don't mind if I call you Carl. So welcome, Carl. So to start with, tell us something about yourself, your journey to become a Socratic kind of guy, and tell something what inspired you to work on this book and your rational discourse research and ideas.
That's a lot, and I can talk for the rest of this entire time without letting another person get the word in, so I'll be as brief as I can. I like people. I know that sounds probably cliche or something, but I just find every time I see somebody, there's an entire world and universe inside them. And I figured the only way to get to know about that is to talk to them. So that's kind of started me on my Socratic kind of guy thing. I've also found that other people can help me find things in myself that I did not know were there. And I think that's kind of neat. So dialogue to me is number one. Not writing, not giving speeches. Dialogue is super, super important. Why did I write the book? Again, having just said that that's not really my forte, both basically because I was pestered by lots and lots of students, by lots and lots of professors. I've also been the advisor on philosophy clubs for decades, honestly. I've had thousands of discussions, arguments, etc. Many productive, some not so productive, but I learned from all of them. I hope I learned from all of them. And I found that in the club meetings, what I've eventually honed into this rational discourse that I write about in the book, it has led to productive dialogues with community building, I guess is the right way to say it. We've had heated arguments, don't get me wrong, but they've been without the angst and the unhealthy conflict that often is associated with arguments. And to me, that's a big positive. We make progress. We all watch the news. I see people who mistake their inferences or ascriptions for an observation, and I think, hey, they're not looking at what I see as reality. I see people who think they can meet others. They can throw a few slickly crafted sentences at them or a statistic or two and think they're going to change their mind. It takes somebody their entire life to think and feel the way they think. This takes time. We're all philosophers or philosophy minded here. I mean, just like philosophy takes patience and time, so does discourse. I'm reminded, if I may give an example from many years ago, I used to show a video in a class. It was these two scholars who were arguing about an interpretation of a text that was important to them from different traditions. And they were gesticulating wildly and yelling. And at one point, one of them seems to forget what he wants to say. And the other one very calmly says, oh, judging by the tradition from which you were just arguing, you would probably say something like this. And the first one said, oh, yeah. And then they started arguing again. And that it sums it up to me. They weren't enemies. They weren't arguing at each other, yelling at each other. They were actually arguing for each other because both of them wanted a good definition or a good concept or a good idea of what this passage was. And that's kind of my, the way I see these things. And maybe lastly, people's expectations seem to differ on things. You'll hear somebody say, oh, I have a policy and it's going to, I don't know, end poverty. And someone comes along and says, I don't think that policy will end poverty. And they'll say, well, you must not want to end poverty if you don't want this policy. And I think to myself, well, no, that's not what they're saying. So I got to say something.
Great. I think that's a great summing of a rational discourse you are interested, Carl. So my question will be, why do you think that is important? Do you think it is important? It is today because we live in a much more contentious, challenging times. Because I was reading your book and I was reading some of the great ideas, beautiful words, like you say, small minds discuss people, mediocre minds discuss events, great minds discuss ideas. So say something more about the significance and importance of rational discourse and why we need that now. Can you say something more about that?
Okay. Well, I didn't invent that small minds thing. It's just so everybody knows I'm not making that claim. Well, look, rational discourse isn't important if you're okay having a king or a queen or just making power win the day. So, you don't need it. But I ask people, look, let's say somebody really does know something, because there are some smart people, there are some experts and just people who know. If there's someone who really does know something, not just think they knows, really knows, and a bunch of other people want to do something different, if that person who does know gets their hands on enough power to just compel everybody to do it, well, then at that point, you might say, well, at least the right thing got done. But it's hard to believe that that person will know on everything. And if they've already accumulated that power, they're going to be wrong a lot in the future, and there won't be a counter to that. And that's one of the reasons why, even when you are right, I think discourse is important, just to keep the method going with everybody. Obviously, more minds, in on anything seems to be a pretty good thing. We all kind of would agree with that. More buy-in on any kind of a action, whatever, a procedure would make progress easier. Now, you can get more buy-in with propaganda or with ideology, sure. But I'm going to give you a little example that I use in my classes. It's a silly one, but it works. If someone comes up and they say, hey, I have a shield and I think it's a bulletproof shield, and someone looks at them and says, I don't think it's a bulletproof shield, and they say, I don't care what you think, that's my truth, or I really believe it, well, they can say whatever they want. Well, let's say a couple of people come along and they say, hey, we need to go across town and there's, gunfire or something, and we need someone to protect us. Could you? And you say, yeah, I have a bulletproof shield. I'll walk you across. Well, let's say they're about to walk across and the person puts the shield down just for a second to get a drink of water or something. And then somebody comes up and, maybe shoots at their shield and it shatters. My question for my classes, and I'll just ask everybody, would you be mad at that person for shattering your shield? And most people initially, some people say yes, but most people initially figure no, because I was about to walk across so what's my point? I look at our opinions and our beliefs about things. We want them to protect us like a shield, but they can only do so if they're right or if they're true. Does that make sense? So I think discourse can be a way that we actually help each other figure out if our shields are good. That's why I say with rational discourse, everybody wins, because if someone can show you that your shield isn't what you thought it was, they helped you. It's not, even if they're your enemy. There's, obviously, today, as you mentioned, a lot of people think that the more passionately they feel about something, the more right they must be. And, that's not true. Hyperbole is commonplace. This one's Hitler and that school board's fascist. They're really just expressing a distaste for somebody, trying to tarnish them. But more importantly, with all these different perspectives, and we have different perspectives, that's what makes a lot of rich society come up. But with just conflicting perspectives, there's no arbiter. And then whatever decision gets made will simply be, again, upon power. So I say, and you read this in the book, the immediate goal should be to understand somebody else. to help them articulate their view. Not everybody's, well-spoken. So our goal should be to understand where they're coming from, not pounce on them, not humiliate them. And I'll add one more thing. I said I'd try to be brief. It's very hard for me, sorry. But I find that rational discourse gets derailed sometimes when somebody argues maybe from ego or like from their perspective, but with reason, because there are very smart people out there. It's even harder to talk to them because they have great arguments. You just realize that they're grounding their arguments on something other than having used their reasoning to in the beginning. Does that make sense? They're rationalizing, I guess is the right word. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that makes, I think, absolute sense. And I think I like the idea that you say that it is something in which everyone wins. All the participants win in some ways.
Yeah.
And in that context, I was reading a book and it talked about 20 considerations. Like you talk about Habermas, reconstruction, discourse. Then you talk about Robert Nozick, entitlement.
Yeah.
So you talk about many useful ideas on how to promote a rational discourse, because it seems that people are more inflexible, rigid. They believe in othering kind of thing. So can you explain, maybe elaborate in simple terms, how to promote a rational discourse in difficult times?
Sure. Well, just to go back, since you pulled two ideas together from the last question and this one,
Yeah.
I'll give you one other quick little heuristic I use. If we have a child and somebody likes the child and wants to feed the child, a good diet because you care about the kid. Well, our elections nowadays seem to be somebody walks up and they say, hey, if you vote for me, I'll feed this menu to this child or this diet to this child. That's like saying, these are my policies. The child obviously would be the country. Somebody else comes up and says, no, I like this child. I care about them. I think you should feed this thing. Well, I use this in my classes sometimes, and I'll say, well, let's say that the first person's diet was 75% good for the child, and the second person's diet was 50% good for the child. Well, if the first person wins the election, I ask the class who wins, and everybody says, well, they won, but the kid won too. And I ask them who else won. And sometimes somebody figures out, well, the person who had the 50% menu, they win also, if their goal really was to feed the child something good. If their goal was just their ego, I want to win, I'm the good one. So I do think that we have to remember what the goal is. If the goal is to have a good, functioning society, then the source of the idea or the policy is not as relevant as is it going to work or not. Now, you asked me how to promote rational discourse. My immediate answer is use it, model it. That is what I found to be most effective. When you do that, onlookers don't seem to be as emboldened to kind of go off the rails, basically. You have a much better chance of getting people who want to continue along that line. Maybe it gives them permission. I don't know how to look at it. I just know that it works. And this one is a big one. I think if we try to see people in terms of how they see themselves, that is a very good way of beginning a discourse with them, because most people don't see themselves as whatever it is other people call them and see them. So if you can, that doesn't mean they're right about how they are. It just means that it's a starting point.
Yeah.
Of course, you find commonalities with them. That's important. And you mentioned the other. I think that's a very important point. If you can show people that the other can help you and you can mutually help each other, that's great. You can discern where you differ after that. But I did find, as I mentioned, in all of my club activities, all of my arguments, that it's when people start to practice rational discourse the way I described it in the book, they actually change. They argue passionately, don't get me wrong, but they argue less for something that they just want or feel. And I'm not discounting those. I'm just saying they argue less than that. They argue more for a goal or a method, and that allows us all to not make everything so personal. Did you get to the point in the book about the think like a Terminator, not an impassioned lawyer?
Yeah.
Okay. I can explain that because that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Please.
Okay. If you've looked through the table of contents, you'll notice a lot of weird phrases and things. And I guess I was just trying to be, a little bit funny because it's a difficult, boring topic, perhaps.
Yeah, please be funny. Please.
I'll be funny. Well, the Terminator was.
We need fun. We need
fun. You can't turn this on. A Terminator is from the movie, with Arnold Schwarzenegger years ago. And a lawyer's job is to jealously guard their client's interests. So what I say is when you're entering a rational discourse, because we're concentrating on goal or method, we think to ourselves, okay, a Terminator, they don't have a side, they have a mission. So if our mission is to have a fair tax policy or a way of getting healthcare to more people, if that's the mission, then if we go out there and we argue like an impassioned lawyer, it assumes that whatever side we have, that's already the winning thing. But if we argue like a Terminator, we have a much better chance, I think, of saying, okay, I can switch that if there's a better way of getting to that goal. I'm not wedded to it because I'm not emotionally or my ego's not wedded to it, if that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I have millions of things to say, but I will cut it off there.
No, great, great. I think we should talk more about these things. It's great ideas, Carl. This is great ideas, and I'm absolutely with you what you're saying. But I come from like conflict resolution background. I see the result, the outcome. So I go to the field, to see peace.
Yeah.
So I see kind of I'll have to be challenged. So there is kind of chasm or gap between philosophical ideas and the practicality, right? It sounds great, sounds beautiful, positive, but when I look at the practicalities, let me draw your attention to some of the things. So I think you talk about some of those ideas. You talk about bandwagon, you talk about negative tribalism, all those things, how they can be obstacles, like ego, false ego, those kind of things. And he might be aware of the famous book by Robert Fisher. He wrote a book about how to get to yes, right? He's one of the founders of negotiation literature at Harvard University. So he wrote a book, How to Get to Yes. That's the book.
Getting to yes.
Getting to yes. Yeah, you're right.
I know, I have the book.
Thank you for correcting me. Getting to yes. So his argument is how to argue your case rationally, you negotiate, but you win. So that implies somebody's losing and somebody's winning. So I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around how to apply these ideas in practical terms. So my question will be, what are the obstacles you think, possible obstacles, to have a pure rational society without violence, conflict, and negativism?
Okay, I don't assume that we're ever going to have that, honestly. I'm not, I know some people, maybe Hegelians or something, are working towards some kind of society like that. I don't live in that one right now. Can I give you a quick example from, it's in the book, but it's something that actually happened that explains why I don't. Yeah. There's a section in the book called, oh my goodness, what was it? Don't assume a spherical horse, if anybody remembers that. All right, I had it a couple of years ago. I had it. I periodically would have discussions with colleagues over, wine and cheese or something, and we'd argue for 2 or 3 hours, and it was great. We both know the readings and we have different views, and it's really wonderful. And one time, this is to me funny. I was with somebody and we argued for about 2 hours about some economic system. 2 hours, okay. And again, we're having some social moments as well. After 2 hours, I just couldn't understand some of the things he was saying, and I apparently didn't understand what I was saying. But 2 hours in, he said something about robots. And I said, what robots? He says, my system. It's in the future when robots produce our material needs, this economic system will work perfectly. And I was like, what? I've been arguing about how the world is right now, not some future. So it reminded me of that physics joke. Do not assume a spherical horse. Is everybody familiar with the joke? Oh, I have to do it quickly. I know we're recording and we don't have a lot of time, but it's basically I'll just go quick. A university was running out of money. They knew they had a lot of brains at the university. They decided the only thing they could do is put their money on a horse race. They'll put all the money they have. So they got the kinesiologist, the zoologist, the statisticians, everybody they could. You got 24 hours to figure out who's going to win this horse race tomorrow. So the university professor leaves them, comes back the next day and says, anyone have any ideas? And the statistician's saying, look, I could tell you out of 1,000 races maybe, but I don't know one. The kinesiologists are saying, I don't know what the conditions, and I haven't studied the horse. Everybody doesn't know the answer. The physicist, she's sitting in the corner with a little index card, and she says, I got the answer. So the university president says, well, we don't have a lot of time, so you just come with me. You can explain it on the way. So they're in the car driving to the track, and the university professor says, well, can you explain like why you seem to be so sure of this? And the physicist, she says, well, it's actually pretty simple. The formula fits on an index card. He says, well, can you tell me? She goes, yeah. The only thing you have to do is assume a spherical horse traveling through a vacuum. Then it works. And of course, horses are not spherical. They have protuberances. They have ears and legs. They don't travel through a vacuum. They travel through mud and stuff. So this is why I completely agree with you that I don't try to live in the world of if everybody were or you should just. I try to live in the world of, look, this is what we're going to deal with. How do we make the best of it? I know that's not what everybody does, and maybe I'm wrong to do that, but that's what I found to be kind of my niche right now until shown otherwise. I like the idea of rational discourse the way I describe it. Some of the comments from the emails that you were sending, Richard, especially, I really took to heart. I was thinking about, like, I'm an appreciator of Nietzsche and Goethe, and some I can include that. But I'll go and say I don't know if this is. I think I'm more narrow. My view of rational discourse is more of a method than an epistemology, perhaps. I think the epistemic underpinnings of physics is not necessary to know if you're going to decide to drive over one bridge or not drive over a rickety bridge. So I look at it like that. I look at, look, I've seen people argue. I've seen them, not get anywhere. I'm not trying to cure anything. I'm trying to make anything I can better. That's really my goal. But there is a disadvantage. Sometimes a rousing speech is really much more needed than a set of arguments, and I recognize that, but again, the problem is that too many people, too often, they feel passionately about something, and then they use their brains to rationalize it. Are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt, the Righteous Mind? Yeah, okay, good. You know exactly what I'm talking about. He describes an elephant being the sum total of somebody's inclinations and passions, and the reason would be the rider on top of the elephant, and he says usually the rider just rationalizes the direction, and I think this is Humean probably, the reasons is related to passion. But I think the proper order, and I think he's right about that. I think most people definitely do that, and most people do it most of the time. But I think that Plato, his idea of the charioteer and the chariot, are you all familiar with that? Okay, good. I think that I kind of think that's possible. So in my view, the reason should arrive at something that makes sense, whatever the goal is. Maybe the goal is about a passion, or the goal is about feeling better. That's fine. But whatever the goal is, reason could be the thing that should take you in that direction. As we all know, a kid does not want a needle in their arm because it hurts. But if you use your head, it's actually better because the pain later. So that's how I look at that. Yes, the whole point is to live a deeply fulfilling, beautiful, wonderful life, as Dr. Mahapatra said initially, Arvind. But the way to do that sometimes is to push it aside and use this kind of discourse. I think this is where most activists, frankly, miss the mark. They might have good intentions, although I don't assume that, but they might. Maybe they have good hearts and they have good, solid intellects. But if they don't use their intellect first, I think they could be fighting for a passion or something that might be short-sighted or have terrible consequences, or just be wrong. And my interpretation of Plato's Republic, with the 5 forms of government being like a kind of person, I think Plato puts an activist maybe as that second form, the spirited form. That's my interpretation. And we could have another discussion in the future. But I think it's still a pretty good form of government of a human, but it's not the top. It's not a philosopher.
Yeah.
Again, I have millions of things to say, but I know you probably have other questions.
No, that's great. It's fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Rich or Miguel.
Well, actually, since you mentioned, my questions, my preliminary questions to you about some of these critics, sort of a lot of postmodernish sort of ones of Western rationality and everything. And I almost get the impression, not that the scope of the way, and this probably should be the preface to a question for you about this, but because I get the impression that the scope of rationality that you are talking about is actually much broader than that leveled against rationality, at least in the West, by its critics like Nietzsche. Anyway, Nietzsche to Foucault to the feminists to some of the existentialists, people like that, because it seems to me they look at, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, they look at rationality in the West, especially post-Enlightenment, sort of post-scientific revolution and technology and all that kind of stuff that's changed the way we view the world and the way we live our lives so much. But they view the post-Enlightenment kind of rational mode of rational thinking that they criticize as sort of this very narrowly circumscribed instrumental reason that we use just to accomplish something, to manipulate. What did Descartes say? The mastery and possession of nature, control and dominate things, whether it's nature or other people, right? Or managing systems or winning arguments or wars or conflicts. And I think your sense of rationality is something much more broad than that encompasses that, because I get the impression from what you've written that there's a time for that. There's a time where you need to debate and really confront people about things. But that's only a small part of it. It seems to me what you seem to conceive of the goal of true rationality as being. Am I doing justice to where you're coming from?
I'm enjoying you speaking this because I don't have to say it when you're saying it. But yeah, that's I look, as a philosopher, I loved reading your email, and did some readings again to remind myself of things. I didn't want it wasn't what I had in mind to talk about this book, because is just a method maybe. But I completely agree. I think that the criticism of historical uses of reason, I think they're valid. I think that we have used it to dominate. I mean, again, I hate everything brings the Nazis up, but that was an incredibly good exemplar. But I think it doesn't have to be that way. And I think you're rightly bringing that up. I don't look at it to control. I look at it to recognize. So I'm big on autonomy, and I think we increase our autonomy when we can arrive at both what maybe Habermas would call the communicative rationality in the social world to arrive at a consensus. So it's not a static point. It's more like a proportion of all what the world is at that moment. So I think it's moving, yes. So they're right, it's not static, but I think as a proportion, it's static in that sense, as a proportion. I'm a fan of Plato's admonition, I suppose, to develop our faculties of apprehension, which are organic. They are who we are. I mean, our eyes are the faculty to see empirical things that are, visible, but we have other faculties and I want that development. But I'm also a fan of Goethe's idea. If you're familiar with the informing principle, I love it. When he talks about his argument with the Newtonians, it's so interesting. But he talks about studying a river, for example, and he says you don't freeze a river, chop it up, and dissect the fish. That's not a river. So I agree with him with that. And I'm no Nietzsche, I'm no Goethe, but I'm appreciative of that. So I don't really offer a counterpoint to the people who have those criticisms, because I think they're valid and accurate. I just want people to use this method to apprehend more. I do think that if the more we apprehend, I think the more we will. Maybe it's just a faith of some sort, but I think we will get along, because we won't be as apprehensive about misunderstandings, and that in itself is a win. Yeah, like Nietzsche wanted us to he thought of reason as maybe not knowing the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, but knowing, like putting it in categories. But even if that's all we're doing, at least those categories help us survive in the world. Are you familiar with Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Very reference. All right.
You read the book Philosophy and Buffy the Vampire.
I used it in a course I taught. There you go. One of my books. But there's the message of this series is a postmodern message, and I think that the message is that reason, like just our mind, and I do agree again, it can't control all the powers that are there in the world. I'm good with that. But even in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I feel very strange using this, but it's a good example, even they did research to help fight the forces of darkness. So I think that I'm not claiming reason does everything. I'm saying it's a very good, Arvind, you had asked me a while ago about what's beyond rational discourse, like what else to do. I think there's a lot beyond that. I think intuition is a very important part of our life. It's organic. It's who we are. I think there are possibly forms of faith. I don't know. There are certainly primal and deeper epistemologies out there. I just think that relying upon those requires some kind of measure of trust built up with maybe reasoning to see, are they really, like, I'll just call it wisdom. I mean, who knows what evolutionary mechanisms are out there? I don't know. There's a lot of stuff available to us.
Would you also say then that the opposite is true as well, that to employ rationality in the way that you're interested in doing so, that may perhaps needs to encompass, if not encompass, maybe certainly be informed and inspired sometimes by things like intuition and faith and revelation and other
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It's a big, wide world. Shakespeare's line, "There's more under heaven and earth than dreamt of in your philosophies." I mean, I realized that was a more narrow meaning there, but we can do it in a bigger sense. There really is. I don't know what's out there. I have a few books. You may have read something along these lines about forbidden science, I think is the name of one of them. It's just things that people have explored that the scientists of the time have, poo-pooed, so to speak. But later, some of them came to be like, oh, there is something to this. Epigenetics is an interesting, and I realized, again, our minds are like and I use the Platonic version of the sun. We have like a flashlight to shine light on things. We didn't invent the things. We still have to try to understand the things, and I don't know what else is out there. I don't know what other faculties we can develop.
Just to add to that, there's a famous statement by Sri Aurobindo that, within quote, reason is nothing but a measured dance of mind.
Measured dance of mind?
Measured dance of mind, because you're talking about measuring, logic, reasoning. But when there's no measure, there's no limit, it can go in multiple directions.
Completely agree. And of course, there's a difference between logic and reason, as I put in the book. I hear all these people telling me how logical they are, and I think that's fine, but you could be logical and wrong all the time. Which is accurate, right? They don't seem to realize that.
That's the fundamental. That's the kind of distinction, I think. And again, that's why I think perhaps especially the postmodern and even modern critics from Hume on, right? Critics of Western reason have tended to look at it to equate reason with a much more narrow kind of logic and instrumental sort of mechanized thinking that, again, you can see where the cultural influences that shaped that came from. But do you think that, I mean, I don't know, I know that this isn't the scope of this conversation necessarily, but I'm just wondering, as long as we raise the issue, do you think that if you were, because you've certainly done a lot of thinking, diagnosing the contemporary problems with rational dialogue that arise with rational dialogue, do you think that maybe one of the dilemmas for that faces institutions and people now that seem to go off the rails as far as rational dialogue is concerned? Do you think one of the problems is maybe that they are construing the nature of reasoning too narrowly in that sense? They think they've proved a point when they're super logical, and they've got an airtight argument that way, but they really haven't addressed the issue in a wider sense. I don't know. You think we have a lot of that? It seems like institutions do anyway.
Just to add to maybe to reach, so Carl can respond. So are you referring to the ideas of logical atomism, people like A.J. Ayer and Russell, those ideas? So because there's a famous statement by A.J. Ayer. He says metaphysics is nonsense, right? Because you can apprehend metaphysics through your senses, right? So and logical positivism, as it's applied in so many institutions like ours, I think in so many ways seems to exhibit that kind of narrowness of thinking. But I don't know. What do you think, Carl?
No, I agree again, and I have the same answer to both of yours. I was first frustrated, saying I have an answer ready, and now I have another question coming, but they're very simple, so I can answer them both at the same time. I think that they're much too narrow, and I think this is just a possibility. I haven't really researched this incredibly, but I think the Enlightenment probably, for all the gifts it's given us, and I think it has given a lot of gifts, and the scientific revolution in a more narrow sense, but still a lot of power, maybe the gift of power, but that's of course could be used for good or ill. But I think that might be one of the problems. It's a lot of this stuff is, for lack of a better term, and I'm not claiming to be a neurobiologist of the brain, but it seems like left brain kind of thinking where everything's self-referential. And if things just, right, so that's what, I guess that's my answer then. If things are self-referential, then you can prove almost anything, and you can, and it can seem right to you. You have to have that. Again, you want to go back to Nietzsche, Apollonian, Dionysian, he called, maybe it's a conflict. I don't think it's a conflict. I think it's a dance. I think that's a great word that you used, Arvind, earlier, the dance. I love that word. I think Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein about this. I really believe that that was the reason. It was like all the stuff. It's dead thing. It appears alive, but it's not, and it's just pieces. And I don't think that's natural. I think that probably the development of more faculties of apprehension, or the ones we have right now, it might be the best place to go, which is why you probably heard me say I consider myself an educator far more than I consider myself a teacher, because I don't know what's out there to know. I'm limited, very limited, but I'm trying very hard not to be. And, I have my own thoughts about things. I yell at the TV like everybody else. But in real life, if I take a step back, I am as open can be about what's out there. I'm not so open that my brain falls out, as one of those articles. I've read them all, but you sent me. I have tons of notes on them, but we can discuss anyone.
I think you talk about that in your book.
Yeah.
You give the definition of education. Educe, how to pronounce that? Educe.
Bring out.
To bring out.
Yeah.
So.
But you mentioned also, I forgot to say this. Are you all familiar with Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. It's an interesting book. You probably would realize this already, but I'm not a neo-Marxist. But Freire's got a lot of good things in his book. One of the things he talks about, and I use this in my book, I say if rational discourse isn't happening, then the Freire's method of building a thematic universe is very good. I think it's similar in some ways to communicative rationality. I'm a fan of Habermas when it comes to that. I don't necessarily think that everything that we agree upon is the case, but I do think that in the social world, everything we agree upon is or will be the norms of the time that we operate according to, or according to which we operate, and that is what allows us to have a measure of autonomy. I mean, my example is, in the physical world, if we didn't have physical laws, if I took a step and I didn't know I was going to stick to the ground, I couldn't get anywhere. I would never be able to plan my life. If one time it slid around and one time it flew up in the air. So you have to have a set of rules at any given moment. And those ought to be agreed upon rules, or at least something that's, again, I'll just use the word rational in that large term. So I think that Habermas is right about putting together that, and Lyotard, not Lyotard, Freire uses that. He uses the idea of building a thematic universe together. But the important part is, it's not one group coming in saying, oh, you all are missing something, let me inform you about that. It's literally allowing the other group. The example in the book I give, Arvind, did you get to the point, or Dr. Mahapatra, sorry, did you get to the point where
No, Arvind's fine. I was
Arvind's fine. Okay. There's one point, and it's an example I use, and it's in Freire's book. He says some Westerner, I think it was, came into this village and was he had planned on talking about the evils of alcoholism and how it's destroying, the families. And he came in and he showed a few pictures of people sort of leaning up against posts who were intoxicated, and he asked everybody, "What do you think of these people?" And the consensus of the town people, are you ready? They're good people. Why? He was surprised. They said because they care so much about their families that this situation is making them want to drink because they can't do anything. Because it's not that they don't care at all. And the person never would have gotten that had he not actually tried to find out where they were coming from.
Yeah.
I think we could do that in our politics today. Obviously, there's so many people with such heated views of things. And I'm not saying some of them aren't right. I mean, they might be right, but it doesn't mean that the other group doesn't have an impetus or something. Let's find out what that impetus is. Let's not make an ascription to it or infer something we think from our axioms. Let's find out what they're saying. and then we can address it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, well, as long as nobody else is speaking up, is that the problem, you think? Is that the main I don't know, problem with contemporary? I guess maybe now to focus the discussion on that, because I know that's one of your areas of expertise, political discourse. Is that the problem with political discourse in the contemporary milieu, sort of, that, or is it just in the public discourse? Well, I guess it's all. There is no high and low culture anymore, I guess. So I don't know. What do you think? Is that the problem with contemporary? Is that why it's gone off the rails and we can't seem to make any progress?
I think we are making progress, and I know nobody thinks that.
Really?
I do. I think it's just a bigger arc, and a lot of people in social media, that whole mix. But I'm going to posit something else. I don't necessarily think this, but this is just coming in my head. I think that our system is kind of an adversarial system.
Yeah, I guess
okay.
Yeah.
And let's assume that that's a good system. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying let's assume that they were right about that. If one person comes up with all their arguments and they try to get someone, another person comes up with theirs, then the better one wins, and everyone's better. You know, in the marketplace, in the law courts, whatever. Assuming that that's true, and I'm not assuming it, but assuming that that's true, just to posit it, I think maybe our politics has taken that, but started to utilize the. You mentioned postmodernism. I think that there's a lot of healthy uses and applications, I think, of postmodernism, especially in politics. But I think it's just gotten way too broad, and it's not useful anymore. It's really bad, I think. And I think maybe that combination of the adversarial relationship, the postmodern idea, and possibly even some Marxist thought. I mean, I'm a fan of a lot of the things Marx's criticisms were, but the idea of always seeing this everything in that one way. If you combine the postmodernism with my own narrative, with the adversarial, then almost anything goes. If you can mark another person as it's an othering from maybe it's an ontological othering. It's like they don't even exist on the same as the same thing as you are, because they don't have to in your opinion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
I think probably you are referring to the term moral exclusion.
Yeah. Okay. I've not heard of that, but that sounds.
So you dehumanize your opponent. They don't belong to your moral universe.
Yeah.
So like they are not human beings. They are something. I think that played out a lot during the Cold War times. So we don't have the Cold War, but we have multiple wars on multiple fronts with moral exclusion is happening a lot. And I hope rational discourse plays a positive role to address some of those exclusions, at least mentally, not rationally, because everything comes from here, and because I always look for solutions. I mean, as a method, as a dialogue forum, that's great, but I'm kind of curious, kind of how to help. How can it help us to have positive solutions? So I come from that kind of area. Yeah.
In the book, I refer to in a section called "When Rational Discourse Doesn't Work," I refer to Lyotard's idea of the transgressive, and I'm not using the broad application of it, but just the very idea of skipping over, like the jumping over of a period of time.
Yeah.
I think that maybe that's our only hope. I'm not saying it is, but maybe we have to just say, look, let's assume we're going to have irreconcilable. We don't understand each other, but we can start, and this is why I like Freire again. We can at least get some mutual things together. We want our children to have a better life. We want fewer wars in the world. We want, we'd have to agree to do that, though. So we'd all have to agree on something bigger than us. And I think I use the example of the South African Constitution, wherever it has gone after that. The idea that when they were first making it, if you read through I'm not an expert on it, but I've read a fair amount of how it was put together. and they had to use this. They basically had to say, there's no way to reconcile what had happened.
Yeah.
It just can't be done. So they have to just jump over it for their children's sake. That's kind of what I saw them doing. That's why maybe it's, I don't know. I don't look at this book as having the answers. I just think it's a start to get, it really does. I promise this rational discourse, the way I described in the book, simmers people down. It allows them to have all the passions they had before, and they're allowed to want everything they wanted. They just don't think the other person has to be destroyed and killed, and they're not afraid of them anymore. They're mad sometimes or frustrated, but I've seen people have big arguments in class or in the club, not in class. I don't do it as much as in the classes, but in the clubs, and then they go and they have a coffee and dance a salsa together because they realize they're a whole person, so they don't other anymore. That's why I mentioned at the very beginning, part of what we do is with the dialogue is build community. I think that's maybe part of it. And to Tocqueville, he had it right. We do have all kinds of communities. And then, of course, Putnam's idea of bowling alone, we don't do it anymore.
I like those words, simmering down. You said that, simmering down.
Yeah.
And that itself is a big goal, I think. Because anything helps the society, the community. I think they're all welcome. And I think you are referring to social capital, right?
Yeah.
Talking more and engaging.
Yep. And sometimes, unfortunately, and this happens in life, there are some things for which some people are rightly hurt and rightly angry and rightly want to, overcome. I just don't think the way to fix it is the way a lot of people are going about it. Now, I'm not going to be someone to say, well, I don't, you're not reacting properly. I don't want to say that to people. I've just seen that it doesn't work. It makes it worse sometimes. You know what I mean?
It's a good way to frame the response, I think.
Yeah.
As opposed to your response, as opposed to your reaction is inappropriate or wrong, to say that it's not going to work if we want to get along or something along those lines.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I do think some of those responses are totally appropriate, and I'm on board, but it doesn't work. Yeah. I want you to fix things. I want your children to have better lives. I want you to have a better life, and it's not going to happen that way. That's what I've noticed. And again, I might be wrong. I'm not 100 years old with millions of years of wisdom. I've been doing this for a long time, and this works in the circumscribed times I've used it.
And again, just to follow up on something you were saying before, I just thought it was interesting, and I'm guessing anybody listening here would probably their ears pricked up when you said it. Just because there's so much, the climate right now is so filled with gloom and doom. I mean, people are not only in a state of conflict that seems heightened now, but they also they're pessimistic about the prospects for any progress now. But you said you think that in some ways we've made progress.
Yeah.
That's an interesting statement. I just wanted to, how so?
Okay. Well, I said there's, all right. That's hard to explain in a few minutes, but I'll try. First of all, one of the things I want people to recognize is when we have like a presidential race, so that's what everybody's talking about. So when we have that, or we have groups of people, in the Senate who are arguing with the people in the House, whatever. When we have those things, it's not a matter of, well, anything in the world could be done versus what this person's doing. It's a matter of what's this person proposing and what's this person proposing. So given that, it makes it a whole lot easier to just put a different person in there. And nobody lasts forever. I remember reading a while ago about a speech where someone referred to, oh, that person is indispensable. And I forgot who it was. It might have been Roosevelt said, gentlemen, the cemeteries are full of indispensable people. Now, and that's kind of but my point is that all of us are we're still an organic society. We're still going to bring new people up. And I think as long as we can keep a measure of understanding or a measure of wanting to talk it out, like even if we can't see a way out now, as long as we want to see a way out, I think some group of people will be on one of those sides at some point, and that will be better. Because I see it in my students. I've had people come to the clubs who are full-on Marxist, full-on libertarian, full-on whatever, because they just never heard they understand their ascriptions and their caricatures of the other group, but they've never actually heard the reasoning for them. Even where somebody might be like kind of wrong about something or downright bigoted or something, the reaction and where to put them is always less than where the people are putting them in their minds. Maybe I'm not describing this properly.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
Okay. So I do feel like we're making progress because I see it in the young people. I do. I really do. I don't
Do you
know.
see it in public discourse, in the news networks and the political debates, and and the spokespeople for for political parties and stuff like that, or no?
I don't get as worked up about anything because I always say to myself, "This too shall pass." It's a famous phrase, and I believe it. I haven't seen. Look, we've had a civil war, we've had a world war, we've had all kinds of stuff happen, and here we are. We're not perfect by any stretch, but we're here.
Yeah.
What else? Here, I'll say one more thing, and then I'll just wait for more questions. What else are we going to do?
Yeah.
What else are we going to do? We have to keep going, right?
And perhaps, just to add to Carl, like what you say, to support your argument, like the younger people, they are not more inclined to follow the religion, right? That's happening now. There's more, right? They don't subscribe to a particular ideology, right? I think that is an indication that we are evolving, we are progressing, perhaps in a different way. So things are happening, things are evolving, things are developing. Perhaps we need some kind of infinite patience or optimism. And like you define the word education, right? As professors, educators, instructors, perhaps we have a role to play to bring those elements, those ideas more active, more on the surface. And I'm very much optimistic about those things.
I forgot who it was. There was a quote that I use when I discuss civil liberties, civil rights.
Yeah.
It's something like we're the principles of the republic that we seem to be committed to might be a myth, but they're a myth that we've committed to. And again, and I kind of think that as well. Look, there's an author, I think his name is Thomas Sowell, if anybody's ever heard of him.
Sure.
He had, he has this one line that I like. He says, when you're judging something, he says, one of them is what's your evidence, one of them is at what cost, but one of my favorite ones is compared to what? Like I do this in my classes sometimes. I'll say, okay, should we make policy based upon how things ought to be, or from where they are with the idea of making them better? Because those are two different policy prescriptions. In other words, like everybody should have health care. That's one set of policy prescriptions. Hey, we have 92% of the people have healthcare. How do we get it to be 93? We're doing something right, so how do we get a little bit more? Because most people on the planet don't, or maybe some of or literacy or poverty, or reducing poverty. So and again, those are that's an important discussion to have. Which one?
Yeah, yeah.
So I generally come from the we've done a lot well. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget that, and there's no reason to throw that out.
So this is some kind of what you call incrementalism, right? We progress slowly, steadily. There is no magic wand. There is no miracle. So things happen, but we have to work for that.
Okay, now you're embarrassing me because another one of the quotes, I think, was Marshall, I believe, Thurgood Marshall. I think he said, "I'm the world's original gradualist. I just think 160 years is gradual enough." So, how gradual do we want some of these things to be?
Yeah.
But I understand. I agree, kind of.
So you're not that much of an incrementalist, because you did sort of sound like that from what you just said, when you sort of rejected the politics of ought for the politics of pragmatic aspiration. And it just seems to me that the politics of pragmatic aspiration have to at least be informed by the politics of ought, right?
Yes.
So which I guess you'd agree with, being the holistic kind of guy that you are about that stuff.
I think
you don't need me. Yeah. Richard can take over my conversation.
No, I think the idea of republic by Plato is exactly that, right? The idea and the practice.
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. Great discussion. I think. It's really fascinating. I'm kind of sponge receiving all kind of great ideas.
We're going to have a lunch at some point, all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Miguel, I always feel like we you know, you get ignored. Not ignored, but you get stultified by all the big egos surrounding you, and you don't get. And especially since we've been covering topics like the South African Constitution and everything, that you're literally the resident expert in. I was just wondering what your take on all this is.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a fascinating conversation. I'm just taking it all in. Did have one question. Or maybe comment. What you mentioned, Dr. Colavito, and I'm sorry, I didn't ask if it was okay to call you Carl, so
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, please.
But you did bring up the point of activism, and I totally agree with that. In this activism today seems to be very emotional. I've been reading a lot, seeing a lot about what's going on in the Hamas-Israeli war. And from the beginning, from the October 7th, it was like all of a sudden, you know, there was an invasion of Israel, and people, particularly in the United States, they got emotional and saying, oh, finally, the Palestinians are standing up for themselves. And then we hear hours later, there was a lot of torture, rape, killings by Hamas toward a lot of Israeli citizens. And 1,200 at least dead, and then more emotions arose on both sides, and you know, then there was talk about, oh, you know, the Israeli dead, and then there was, when the Israelis started the war, I mean, or build up its army to invade Gaza, then there was talk about, oh, the Palestinian deaths, and now it seems like I look at online, my friends and chat groups and everything, and the focus has been more like how much we can hurt the opponent, and instead of how can we end the suffering of the Gazans, as well as bring back the Israeli hostages. It's, and I think if we had more rational thinking, and particularly on political leaders, and saying, let's make our mission, you mentioned mission, let's make our mission trying to reduce the amount of civilian deaths on both sides. You know, then there may be a way for that ceasefire to occur, and everybody will be a little bit more, you know, acceptable on both sides. I don't know, but I don't know if you'd like to elaborate in a few minutes. We have a couple minutes left, but
Yeah. Thanks for throwing that at the very end.
Yeah.
Why'd you ask him to speak? I'm just kidding. No, I'm often you. I like to take in what everybody's saying, so I'm you a lot of times in discussions like this. But you know, they were asking me questions. You're right. They're all human beings. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't. You shouldn't have done this, and they shouldn't have done that, and I think that the people who choose sides are obviously just very, very limited. I'm fine with passion if you've thought something through and that's your best plan to limit the casualties, to not have this occur in the future, then be passionate about bringing that about. But to defend someone is, I'm going to say something maybe controversial, but I think a lot of people look at things, they take sides as a proxy for something. I don't think they even know what it means to be a Zionist or a Hamas or this or that. It's something else about their life that they're on the side of. I'm just going to go ahead and say that, and maybe that's a whole discussion for another time. I'm not a psychologist, but that's my take on it. But I think that our government probably needs people who have an idea of cultures, have an idea of history, not just politics and military and even negotiations. They have to know what's in these people's minds. I said it a while ago. If you can know what how other people see themselves, then you'll have a start to the conversation. I'm a proponent, as Richard guessed earlier, probably more so than I was when I was younger, of realpolitik. Just look, these are things that work, and this is what you got to do. But you absolutely have to respect history. You have to respect culture and the differences in it. whatever comes after that is up to them. We're not in charge of what Israel does or what Hamas does or what Iran does or what Saudi Arabia does, but we do have a heck of an influence on what they do. I agree with that. I think you have to get the this also might be controversial, but there was a speech given by Trump a bunch of years ago to Saudi Arabia. Has anybody recall that speech? One of the things he said in the speech was, you in this region of the world need to get a handle on this. If you want to join the world, stage, you have to get these people in line. You have to understand them, do whatever you have to do. And honestly, I like that. I said, we'll help you do it, but it's not our cultures. It's not our fights. It's not our. Now, I am fully aware that the West has meddled so much with colonization, drawing boundaries, splitting up nations into nation states that really had 2 or 3 nations in one, and that needs to, I don't know what to do with that, to be honest with you. But I do recognize that, hey, either you want more of these things to happen or you want some way forward. And I think maybe that was a way forward, saying, well, I help you get a handle on it, but you got to go and make peace with this area. I don't necessarily think they have to do it by having a capitalist trade, and I think that's what the implication was, trades and stuff. But I don't think it's a terrible idea that countries have some exchanges as a way of simmering things and cultural exchanges. Sorry, this is a huge topic. I really want to talk to you all for so much more, but I know everybody's got to go.
Sorry, I threw that at you at the end. I have also so many other questions, but we do hope to have you back soon, and we'll continue the conversations and have more discussions with you on these topics. They're amazing.
I learned so much just from the emails you all are sending me that I feel it's worth it. It's an education in itself. So thank you for having me.
Arvinda, did you want to say anything to help conclude?
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for coming. I think perhaps I'm not sure you know or not, Rich and Miguel, that Carl is a very busy guy. He's a busy security guy. He does a lot of activities, clubs, organizations, centers. I am happy to be part of some of his initiatives. So thank you, Carl, for coming, for sparing your time, for enlightening us about rational discourse and its various possibilities, advantages, disadvantages. So thank you all, and also hope to see you again in one of the.
Absolutely.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you all.
And I want to
thank you, and thanks so much.
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Dr. Rubinda Mahapatra, Dr. Richard Grego, and our special guest interviewee, Dr. Carl Colavito. And I'm Miguel Rodriguez. I play a doctor only on TV. And as we usually sign off, check us out on YouTube, Infinite Discoveries, as well as our website, infinitediscoveries.org. And signing off with what Dr. Colavito would appreciate. Hasta la vista, baby.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, guys.
Here. Bye.